Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Fantasy Formula One podcast. I am your host, Paul, and today we are continuing with our driver bios from last year as we learn, study what they did last year to hopefully derive some of what they're going to do this year. But we're resuming today with Pierre Gasly, number 10, drives for Alpine. Last year, at the start of 2023 season, he was valued at $8 million. 8.1, I should say, $1 million. So again, for anybody, if this is your first time listening, in 2023, we had $100 million to play with as a budget cap. So in fantasy football, your picks are mutually exclusive, right? If you have one player, somebody else in your league can't have that player. In fantasy F1, everybody can have the same player because there's so few players. There's still almost 700,000 different combinations you can have, barring money, but we'll get into that later. But we have the price cap to kind of limit our options. Otherwise, everybody would just have the same player. So we get $100 million, at least in 2023. $100 million you had to start, and Pierre Gasly would cost 8.1 of those million. His price increased over the course of the season by 6.4 million, bringing him up to a grand total of 14.5 by year's end. Why is this important? Well, if you didn't have Pierre Gasly at the beginning of the season, but yet for some reason at the end of the season you wanted to pick him up, you would end up spending over 50% more money on him later than earlier. And that is one common theme for Fantasy F1 is everybody's value, with one exception in 2023, everybody's value went up. Then that's including Logan Sargent, who had overall negative fantasy points for the year. I have strong opinions about that, but his value went up. So on average, the entire field's value increases spread out over the course of the field, everyone's value increases 5 million. Right now, I'm saying one person does, but the whole field's value increases 5 million every week. So you need to be careful, and if you have a driver, somebody you want, it becomes more and more costly to change drivers as the weeks progress. So that is a little off track, but that's what's going on with Pierre Gasly here. His price increased pretty significantly. But let's go week by week. So in round 1 of 2023 in Bahrain, he qualified 20th. That's okay. First race, him qualifying 20th is no big deal, especially when he finishes 9th like he did here. So that gives him 20 fantasy points for round number 1, which for a driver who only cost $8 million, that is an amazing return on investment. So at this point, if you had Pierre Gasly on your team, you are very, very, very happy in 2023. For the next round, qualified 10th, finishes 9th, and gets 6 fantasy points. That's fine. He's still finishing 9th, so he's still a top 10 driver for $8 million. Wonderful. Keeping it going. And round number 3, qualifies 9th, finishes 20th. Okay, well, let's dive into that a little bit. Well, round 3 in Australia, that is the same race that Pierre Gasly, Nick DeVries, Logan Sargent, and Esteban Ocon all got a DNF on lap 56. My guess is there was a multi-car pileup. I'd have to go back and check the film. So we can't put too much weight on that, but he was mixed up in that and got a did not finish, which, as we know in Fantasy F1, gives you negative 20 points. Round 4 in Azerbaijan, qualified 19th, finished 14th. Again, fine. He got 17 fantasy points. And remember, for these... because it was a sprint race as well, right? So he finished. I think he finished like 13th in that sprint race, which is probably where he got some more of those points. But remember, so long as you qualify lower, finish higher, that usually equates to points. And the only exception is if you qualify in the top 10, still finish in the top 10, that's a little less of a hit, but we'll get to there later. Round 5 in Miami. In the United States, he qualified 5th, finished 8th. Oh, here we go. Here's a perfect example. He got 10 fantasy points. So you get points for qualifying in the top 10. You get points for finishing in the top 10. So while he did have a few points deducted from him because he qualified 5th, finished 8th, he still had a good positive point. So he pulled in 10 for the weekend. And that's exactly what you want for an $8 million a week driver. Round 7 round 6 in Italy didn't happen in 2023. Round 7 going into Monaco, qualified 7th, finished 7th, walked out with 10 points. Again, perfect. If he could get 10 points a race consistently, that would be wonderful. Especially for a buy-in of $8 million, right? His value is always going up, so it's always tempted to trade him to get that cash to get somebody else. But if you can get somebody buy-in any season, I don't care who you are, if you can get one driver for $8 million and have him pull in 10 points a race, that is fantastic. Round 8 in Spain, qualified 4th, boom, finished 10th. Still had 14 points. So if you notice, that 4th place qualifying is wonderful. And so the fact that he finished 10th, he had that 4th place qualifying, that's still, it's not what you want. You always want to finish higher than you qualify, but if you take a high qualifying and still finish in the top 10, that is just fine, especially for an $8 million driver. Round 9, Canada, qualified 17, finished 12th, boom. For some reason, he only had 8 fantasy points, and let's see why. He should have had more, unless he just didn't pass anybody. But let's see. Yeah, that wasn't a sprint weekend. That was not a sprint weekend. So he, qualified 7th. Sorry, correction, 17th. And, finished 12th. I don't know why he only had the 8 fantasy points. So you get fantasy points for passing, but you also get fantasy points for overtaking. And the standard example is, as soon as for anybody who's just listening and not watching, I have my fun little F1 cars, is as soon as I pass somebody, I get 1 point. Then if I go into the pits and they pass me because they don't pit, well, I don't lose that point because I was in the pits. Then when I come out, if I pass them again, I get another point. So I can pass the same person multiple times if the only time they get ahead of me is if I go in the pits or something like that. So that's probably where he got a couple of his points. So there wasn't a lot of points. He just, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, that's 5 points, pass a couple. That's not bad, though. That's not bad at all, especially for finishing outside of the top 10. But notice now, he gained multiple places. He got 8 points. In the previous lap, in the previous race, he qualified and finished in the top 10, qualified 4th, finished 10th. He lost a lot of places, but still had more points. And that's why it pays off to start and finish in the top 10. Round 10, Australia, qualified 9th, finished 10th, 7 points. Okay, see, he actually lost one position, but because he qualified and finished in the top 10, boom, he got more points than when he qualified and finished out of the top 10, but gained a lot of positions. Round 11 for Pierre Gasly, Great Britain, qualified 10, finished 20. He got a DNF on lap 46. Again, I have to go back and check the film about what went on with that, but that's not what you want. But this is a second DNF. I would argue, again, it depends on if you piled up with somebody or what, but as a fantasy, I want to say fantasy player, I don't know if that's right. Are we fantasy managers? I'll have to check it. But as a fantasy Formula One player, we have to wait and I'm trying to figure out some way to do it with stats. You have to wait when a car crashes versus if they crash with somebody else and it wasn't their fault. Well, how much do we really penalize them? How much do we? Yes, the points are still going to go negative, but how much does that influence our calculus as to whether or not we trade them for somebody else? And there's a couple schools of thought of that. Both are valid, right? One is, well, it doesn't matter whether they caused it or not. Nobody on purposely crashes. No one on purposely has a car breakdown. No one goes out to race in Formula One at this level. No one goes out to race, period, let alone at this level, I should say, and plans on crashing. So for me to say, well, they didn't really mean to, it really wasn't their fault, we can't really say that because it's never their fault. But if he gets this DNF on lap 46 and it's solo, well, maybe that would influence my calculus a little more than if somebody hits him like he did earlier. I don't know. We'll see about that. But the point is he takes negative 3 points, which isn't bad for a DNF. That means he was going to be positive 17, but he got negative 13. Round 12 in Hungary, qualified 15, finished 20. Again, got a DNF on lap 1. All right, and here's another thing. Stay tuned for this, right? Because the fact that he got a DNF on lap 1, but he only got negative 19 points. That means he passed someone on merit early in the race, early in lap 1, but then crashed out. Well, who did he crash out with? Well, if you look at the stats, Esteban Ocon got a DNF on lap 2, and he got negative 19 points as well. So to me, that makes me think that Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon had some touching, had some impact, and on the first lap, Pierre Gasly couldn't make it work. Esteban Ocon limped around for one more lap while the engineers tried to figure it out. Then they decided that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, and they went ahead and retired him. So again, this is Pierre Gasly's third DNF, but this is the one DNF that really cost him substantial points, because otherwise he was able to earn points before he got the DNF, but not so in round 12. Moving on, round 13. In Belgium, qualified 12, finished 11, again out of the points, but he got 17 fantasy points for this. And my guess is it was a sprint weekend. It was. Here we go. In the sprint race, he qualified 6th, finished 3rd. So he got a podium on the sprint race, which is wonderful for him. So really strong, and so that overshadows some of the some of the non-top 10 performance. But it was still fine. Still, even without the podium for the sprint race, he still qualified 12th, finished 11th, and got you fantasy points, which is what you want for an under 10 million driver, right? But good for him. He got that podium at the sprint race. All around Belgium, round 13 was strong for Pierre Gasly. And in round 14, the Netherlands, he finished 3rd, which is great. He had 39 fantasy points for Belgium. It wasn't a sprint weekend, but it's huge. So now is when his price is jumping up by leaps and bounds. Again, I didn't keep track of it, I didn't keep track of it round for round last year. I will be for the 2024 season. Round 15 in Monza. So he qualified 17, finished 15. Not quite what you're looking for. I mean, it is what you're looking for. He gained places, but he did not. He didn't get into the top 10, which is kind of uncharacteristic for him at this point. He had 3 fantasy points, and that was not a sprint weekend. All right, round 16. Qualified 6, finished 6, got 21 fantasy points. Really, really great there. Round 17, Japan, finished 10th, got 7 fantasy points. All right. Round 18, Qatar, finished 12th with 11 fantasy points. And round 19, Texas, qualified 7, finished 6 with 22 fantasy points. See, this is really strong performance, man. Round 20 in Mexico, qualified 11, finished 11, 10 fantasy points. Boom. Round 21 Brazil, qualified 13, finished 7 with 24 fantasy points. Las Vegas, that Las Vegas race, qualified 5th, finished 11th with 1 fantasy point. You can't hold that against them. That race was a great race. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm gonna try and actually go to it in the 2024 season. But it was the first time they had raced in Vegas. They built a paddock there, a permanent structure. They did tens and tens of millions worth of dollars U.S. in advertising for it. Like, it was a big event, but it was all the drivers were brand new, basically. They were all rookies. No one had ever even walked that track before it was built. So, which I know sounds silly, but it was a brand new track is all I'm trying to say. But yeah, so he qualified well, which is fine. Finished a little bit less so, fell out of the top 10, only had 1 fantasy point. But personally, there were 3 DNFs on that race, and with how many people struggled and how many spinouts there were and all this, I can't hold that against him. Then round 23, Abu Dhabi, finished 13th, finish off the season with 4 fantasy points. Let's go ahead and look at the season stats here. All right. Sorry, I need to zoom out. I need to get a better screen. There we go. So for rounds completed, he completed all. He participated in all 22 rounds, which if you've seen the previous podcasts, that means that's only important for figuring out some of the numbers. Season overtakes is 127, which is about 5.5 per race. Great. He had 1 podium. It was at 3rd place in the sprint race. Finished in the top 10 11 times, which is wonderful. So about 50%. he finished at the in the top 10. Here said he had one DNF, and I think that is a miscount. So this DNF is the official DNFs, I think. I need to look into it, but we just counted that there was more than that. So that stat's probably a little bit off. I'll make sure they're actually accurate as I, go through it week by week during the year. But so he had multiple DNFs, but to the stats point, he didn't have a lot of DNFs that were heavy point costing. They prevented him from getting a lot of points, but only that one that really cost him so many points. Never got the fastest lap award. Okay, end of the year cost, like I said, 14.5. End of the year fantasy points was 230 with a 230 fantasy points with a points per million of 0.72, which is really right about where you want to be. I don't have anything negative to say about him. It was a fine year, especially if you can get him for that 8 million. As soon as you liked what he did in the beginning of the season, and then you tried to buy in the last third of the season, well, now you're paying, 10, 12, 13, 14 million for him. And that isn't as good of a deal. So this end of the year points per million, which is roughly how many points per million you can expect to get from on any one race, right? So it's your total points divided by the total number of races divided by how much money you cost. This points per million was, I think I got that right. Yeah. This points per million is the end of the year calculated for that 14.5. So this isn't the 8 million, the initial starting value points per million. If so, and I'm going to keep those running totals for the 2024 season, that would be a lot bigger of a number. So if you buy him, you hire him on your team, and you never get rid of him, that value would go up a lot. But I remember in 2013, Pierre Gasly was, every time I thought, this guy was doing good, this guy was doing good, this person's going to have here. Pierre Gasly was a person who I removed and put on my team a lot, which now looking at the numbers, depending on how it worked, ended up costing me money in the long run, which we will see. But, I hope you enjoyed it. That was the bio for Pierre Gasly, and I will see you next time. Cheers.